You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamma Mia podcast.
Just a heads up, this episode contains sensitive themes which may not be suitable for everyone. If you need support, contact Lifeline on 13 11 14. The past few weeks have been a lot, especially if you're a woman.
A powerful movement is sweeping the country tonight as women rise up demanding an end to violence, sexism and unsafe workplace culture.
The safety of women in this place, of female staff, of female MPs and senators should be above politics.
My story was on the front page for the sole reason that it is a painful reminder to women that if it can happen in Parliament House, it can truly happen anywhere.
The women and many men in Australia are sending a message to Canberra loud and clear. We've had enough. But what's actually being done? I'm Mia Friedman and this is No Filter, an interview podcast with people who tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. Tanya Plibersek is the Shadow Minister for Women and the Shadow Minister for Education and Training, and she has been very much front and centre these past few weeks. Last week, she walked out of Parliament House to join the thousands of women, men and children marching for justice and fighting to end the violence against women in Australia. And the next day, she walked back into Parliament and with her, she brought over 135,000 signed petitions, calling on Prime Minister Scott Morrison for change. And today, she's my guest on No Filter. Here's my conversation with Tanya. I wanted to ask after your mental health, because this week, this month, this year has just been horrendous, and I feel like you're carrying a lot of weight for a lot of people. And firstly, I wanted to thank you for that. You presented the petition on the floor of Parliament, but I wanted to check in and see how you were.
It's really nice of you, and I feel really grateful because I've got a lot of friends who have been checking in on me, and I do feel this real responsibility to do better. You know, I'm in my 50s now. I've got a daughter who's 20, and I feel like I've spent most of my adult life trying to make Australia safer for women and for young women in particular, and it just drives me really crazy that we haven't done better by now. I thought we would be further along the track. And I do get sad and frustrated. I mean, I've been overwhelmed by the number of people who have been disclosing sexual assault, childhood sexual assault, themselves, a family member. It does really feel like an epidemic in this country. You know, so many people telling me their stories. But there is an upside that I cling to, really, which is...
Please tell me what it is.
Oh, it's these amazing young women who are leading the charge. And in recent weeks, I've met Grace Tame, I've met Saxon Mullen. I know Brittany Higgins, I haven't met her face to face, but, you know, I see the work that she's doing, and I just am in awe of their strength and their bravery. And it's not just that they're gutsy in the way they're telling their stories, but they've also got a real plan for change. Like, they're really articulate about what needs to change. And Grace Tame's talking about breaking the silence, about people coming forward, telling their story. Saxon Mullen's talking very specifically about the legislative change we need around consent laws.
They've got ideas.
They've got a plan. And I'm in awe of them and their generation.
And it's interesting, you know, you and I are around the same age, and when we were growing up, I mean, I'm sure I did know people who'd been raped, but I didn't know the names of anyone that had been raped and was still alive to tell the story, or who felt able to tell their story to me.
I think that's really true. I remember, there's so many women like Anita Cobby, like Janine Balding, who was abducted from a railway station near where I grew up, and I knew their stories, but they weren't alive to tell their stories. And I think it's phenomenal that we've got these young women today who are vocal about what needs to change, who tell their stories. But I think about, actually, when we were young, just our understanding of sexual assault was almost non-existent, I think. When I was a kid, one of my friends said to me about another girl, her daddy has sex with her. And I was just a kid. I didn't know any better. But I said, oh, that's not true. Daddies don't do that. Now, I think our kids would know enough if they heard that story to go to a teacher or go to their parent. Or for all the frustration and sadness, we are at least a few steps further down the path. I think a child today making that disclosure would find a way to, I really hope after the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse that the conversation is a much larger conversation that we've all been part of.
I think even the understanding of what sexual assault or sexual abuse is has come so far. Oh, and sexual harassment. I was sexually harassed in most of the jobs that I had when I was working hospitality, and there wasn't even a word for it, let alone was it illegal. And I mean, in our lifetime,
there was a word for it. It was joking, and if you couldn't put up with it, it's because you didn't have a sense of humour
or being handsy.
Yeah,
and rape was legal in marriage because there wasn't an understanding that, well, of course it's legal in marriage, right? It wasn't the idea of date rape. That was only a term that you could be raped by someone you knew. That wasn't something that we grew up understanding.
Yeah.
So I suppose you're right to acknowledge how far we've got to go, but also that progress is being made, even though I also share your despair at the moment. It feels bleak.
It feels way too slow. It feels like there's still a long way to go. But I think the problem with not acknowledging the battles that have been won along the way is that the sense of hopelessness overwhelms you, and that's really dangerous for progress. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so you've got to take the wins as you go without giving up on expecting better for the future.
I was so proud to see the footage that came out of the Women's March out of Canberra, and I went to the Sydney one, but to see you and Penny and so many of your colleagues standing front and centre, I would say that you and Penny are the most senior and visible women in Canberra, in Parliament, in both parties, now that Julie Bishop has been forced out by a WhatsApp group of men who call themselves the Big Swinging Dicks, according to her, which just says everything.
I think she pointed out quite rightly that there's probably a bit of wishful thinking in the title.
I think so. Optimists all, I would say. Yeah. But firstly, where are the other women? And secondly, how do you carry that weight? Because it's a lot of weight to carry.
Well, there are other fantastic women, and in the Labor Party now we're at almost 50% female representation in the federal parliament. It's been a long time coming. I was at the National Conference in 1994 where we passed our first affirmative action targets, and I can tell you in 1994 it was controversial. It was a fight.
It's still controversial. That's the joke.
Yeah, well, we had to organise. We did the numbers. There were people who spoke against it on the conference floor. We didn't know we were going to win. It was hard fought.
Were you a supporter of the targets and the quotas?
Absolutely, 100%.
How old were you back then?
Whatever the maths is, I was born in 1969.
So you were in your 30s?
Well, no, I was in my 20s.
You were in your 20s and you were – because what I find is that it can be a generational gap. So young women can be like, no, we don't want quotas because we want to be there on our merits. But then as you get older – and I'm a strong believer in quotas and targets because you realise without them, nothing changes.
Yeah.
The Liberal Party doesn't have them.
Yeah.
And look at what their situation is. What's the percentage of...
Well, I think this is really illustrative, right? In 1994, when we first introduced affirmative action, we and the Liberal Party were around about 14% each, female representation. We were a bit more, they were a bit less, but around about 14%. When I went into the Parliament in 1998, we were a bit more than a quarter and they were a bit less than a quarter. We are now almost half and they're still at a quarter.
Yeah.
So it really focuses the mind. I think what affirmative action, targets, quotas, whatever do, it's very rare that you need to rely on the rules. And in fact, in the Labor Party mostly, there's no intervention that ensures affirmative action. It's just that people are thinking about it all the time. It's like a value that is articulated by this organisation that we want to get to equality, right? And unless you are saying that all the time, we want to get to 50-50, and unless you're prepared to be publicly measured against that aspiration that you've declared, then nothing happens. Inertia sets in. it's not like there's a generation of men who are going, no, after you, madam,
Yeah.
you have the safe seat, you
Yeah.
have the job on the board, you become the CEO.
If there's no accountability, it just doesn't happen, right? And we've
It
seen
doesn't,
that.
yeah.
We've got our control and our test case, and you can see what's happened.
Yeah. And I think the wonderful thing for me is to see this critical mass of women that have really changed the culture in the Labor Party. So when I was first elected, there was a group of women who were elected at the same time, like Julia Gillard, Nicola Roxon, Kirsten Livermore, Michelle O'Byrne,
Julie
Anna
Bishop.
Burke.
It was an amazing
It was
group.
There was a bunch of
Yeah.
people. And if two or three of us were standing in the corridor talking to each other, the old blokes couldn't avoid walking past and going, whoa, the ladies are taking over the place. It's just unremarkable now, right? You know, when we have our party room meetings, half of us are women. Nobody bats an eyelid. It's not a thing in our culture anymore. And that's how it should be in every workplace in Australia, that you're judged on. I'm a great supporter of being judged on our merits, and I reckon if we are judging people on their merits, then of course half of the positions will be going to women, at least. You look at the lineup of people in Parliament, and it is a fiction to suggest that it's the best and brightest that our country has to offer. There's a lot more that goes into getting into Parliament than being just, you know, an outstanding human being and a, you know, intellectual giant. There's a lot of factors at play, and sexism is definitely one of them.
And as Julia Gillard used to say, if you believe that intellectual gifts and intelligence is distributed equally between the sexes, well, then merit's not a problem.
Yes, 100%.
It's different, though, if the measure is experience, because you can't get experience without experience, can you?
Look, I think what happens in many organisations is that more senior people mentor junior people who remind them of a younger version of themselves, right? So if your whole senior team are male and they're looking at young men that remind them of themselves, that's who they're going to mentor and that's who they're going to promote.
Unconscious bias.
Exactly, unconscious bias. And there's also this added worry that some people have that if they're seen talking to a young staff member of the opposite sex at lunch, they're going to be, and this is the thing in politics as well, people assume you're having an affair with someone the minute you talk to someone of the opposite sex. So all of these informal barriers to women's progress are there. Unless you acknowledge them explicitly and have strategies for dealing with them, then the disparity remains.
You were elected in, is it 1998?
Yeah.
In that extraordinary class of women who were newly elected at that election at that time. You've named many of them. Most of them aren't there anymore. You also saw the extraordinary misogyny when Julia Gillard became the first female Prime Minister. What was that time like, and how does it compare to what you're seeing now?
I think it was the beginning of the unleashing of really vile internet trolling against women in politics. I think we'd all had before that time, we'd had what the police politely call fixated persons, and, you know, you'd get an occasional death threat, occasional rape threat on the social media or in the letterbox. But what happened with Julia was so extreme and so widespread. It wasn't just a few
crazies.
Nasty trolls. It was actually something that leached into popular culture more broadly.
Put her in the same chaff bag as Julia Gillard and throw them both out to sea.
And I don't really think we have dealt with that as a society yet. I reread Anne Summers' fantastic lecture about the sort of treatment Julia got mostly online just recently. And if people haven't read that Anne Summers lecture, it's very available online. It's not hard to find. But it's worth having a look at what she calls the R-rated appendix, at some of the images and memes and so on that were doing the rounds about Julia. And it was so pornographic.
Because some people try to say, oh,
derogatory.
well, John Howard was mocked for having bushy eyebrows and wearing a tracksuit. And it's
Well,
like,
people should
no.
Seriously, people should have a look
Yeah.
at some of this stuff. I think it's not psychologically very healthy to look at it too often, but just to know the really disgusting stuff that was doing the rounds. I wish I had been more vocal in calling it out at the time, but I do remember too that when we did call it out, Kelly O'Dwyer, who was then a fairly new Liberal backbencher from Victoria, called the Labor women who were saying, this sort of stuff's terrible, it's outrageous. She called us the handbag hit squad. And the mainstream media, like the newspapers, just loved that. And there was a week of cartoons and articles with the handbag hit squad.
Do you think that would happen today?
Yes, I do. I truly do. And one of the reasons I think it still happens is because so much of the media love a catfight. They see two women disagreeing about something, inevitably in that gendered way. It's a catfight. If two men disagree about something, it's a policy debate about a matter of high importance. If two women disagree, it's a catfight. And I think it really belittled our criticisms of what was going on with Julia. It underestimated the toxicity of what she faced. I think it was really quite degrading for Kelly as well, because I actually think she is better than that. I think she's got a better understanding of gender than a comment like that would suggest. But you get sort of put into opposing camps or opposing corners by these stories, the way these stories are constructed. And it's not good for any of us. It's actually not good for any of us. And I don't feel sorry for myself, right? I've been around a long time. I'm pretty tough. But I profoundly worry that it will turn another generation of women off going into politics. And it's so critical that they do, because when you get a critical mass of normal people in politics, that's when politics becomes healthier and better and more reflective of our community and more successful at getting things done. And while ever the only people who can hack it are people who join Young Labor or the Young Liberals when they're 4 years old and never, think of anything outside of that world, while ever it's narrower and narrower, it's more and more toxic and more unhealthy. So I really, for all of the yuck stuff that people have been observing about politics in recent weeks and months, I can't say strongly enough that the rewards of being involved make it worthwhile. Like the actual lives you get to change. When I was housing minister, I got to meet people who had been homeless who had a home because we'd built them one. When I was health minister, I got to meet kids who had their teeth fixed for the first time because we did kids dental. We did Gardasil vaccine for boys, and because boys and girls have been vaccinated now, the rates of cervical cancer and precancerous lesions are actually going down because we made that change. Like, you have this phenomenal opportunity to make people's lives better. And what I don't want is good people, well-motivated, idealistic, smart people thinking, not getting involved in that crap.
It was very hard to watch Nicole Flint speak, and I've had conflicting emotions. She's the Liberal MP who's quitting politics because of the harassment that she's had from groups like Get Up and others. And she spoke in Parliament and said,
the safety of women in this place, of female staff, of female MPs and senators, should be above politics. The need to change the culture of our parties and of this place should be above politics.
Part of me thought the fact that she was emotional I could relate to, because no woman I know is not emotional at the moment. But then I thought they're going to use this as evidence that women can't hack it. Yeah. That women are too soft.
Yeah. Look, I really feel for her. And when she said that she was retiring from politics, I sent her a message at the time saying, I'm sorry about that. And I obviously wish her well with whatever she does next. But I think it's really sad that she's experienced this stuff. And the truth is that all of us relate. I mean, we have all experienced it. My colleague Anne Ali, Jed Carney, Susan Templeman this week also spoke about some of the people they've had making very serious threats against them and their families, credible threats that the police take seriously that are in the courts at the moment. And my real mixed feeling about this is I think it's great that we're talking about it. It's important to call out bad behaviour, but trolls feed on the oxygen. The fact that they've upset someone and even, made them think about or actually decide to leave politics, that's a real win for a misogynist who doesn't think women should be in Parliament.
For someone who spray paints something on someone's office.
Yeah, well, that's happened literally to all of us. That's happened to all of us.
That's
honestly.
shocking. That would be shocking to most people.
One of my colleagues has had, during the last election campaign, had her posters defaced every single night. She changed them every single day. $5,000 worth of posters defaced by one guy. I had another colleague who was pushed over on polling day, pregnant, 2016 polling day, pushed over by someone who works in politics now. I mean, she knows who the guy is.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to tell all these negative stories because I don't want to give satisfaction to the people who do it. And I really don't want to turn people off because the more normal people that get involved, the more diluted that crazy,
becomes.
Horrible people are. And honestly, if you love your country and you want people's lives to be better, it is one of the best ways of doing that. And I don't want to leave the table. I don't want to vacate the field.
Please don't.
I don't mean me personally, but,
But also,
I don't want the
don't.
good people. I don't want the good people to leave it to the arseholes.
Yeah. You're listening to No Filter with Tanya Plibersek. I want to change tack because I want to change tack. Your parents were Slovenian peasant farmers.
Yeah.
That's amazing and also fascinating. What does that even mean? And how do you get from a Slovenian peasant farm to the most high-profile woman in Australian politics?
So the first time I met my grandfather, we travelled from Australia to Slovenia. I would have been 4 or 5 years old. I've got a vivid memory of it. We arrived at the farm where my mum grew up. My grandfather was out in the fields and he was cutting wheat with a scythe.
A scythe?
Yeah, so hand cutting
from
a field of wheat.
The olden days.
And, bundling it up and putting it up to dry. And then we got into a handmade wooden cart pulled by 2 cows.
Stop it. They couldn't even, not even a donkey.
It wasn't it? No, it wasn't a donkey. They were the cows that were milked later that evening to make the milk for our dinner, to get the milk for our dinner. Yeah, it's just an incredible story. My parents are phenomenally brave people and resourceful. They were children during the Second World War. Little kids, the Nazis invaded. One day they went to school and their teachers were speaking German or disappeared. And they both grew up in very difficult, they were poor to start with, and then during the war that was exacerbated by invading armies taking everything that they could to eat as soldiers. In fact, my mother said all the women used to be hidden in the basement when the armies were coming because there was, of course, a constant fear of rape. And after the Second World War, what was then Yugoslavia closed its borders. My mother escaped overnight, one night, into Italy, into a refugee camp in Italy. My father did the same, but he went into Austria. And both of them had essentially the same experience. They
hadn't met yet?
No, they hadn't met.
Wow.
They were in their 20s. Just nothing for them at home. And my father in particular they were both devout Catholics, and Yugoslavia was communist at the time. There wasn't much encouragement for people practicing their religion. There was pretty strong discouragement actually. Anyway, they were in refugee camps. They spoke to the International Organisation for Migration, who said you can go to my dad. They said, well, if you want to go to Canada, you have to wait 6 months. If you want to go to Australia, it'll be 6 weeks, something like that. And he went, 6 weeks sounds better. So that's how he chose to come to Australia. My mum said she wanted to go to California because she'd heard California was nice, but they said, Australia's quite a lot like California. So she went, that sounds all right.
Wow.
That's how they came to Australia. And they met at a dance at the Paddington Town Hall.
It was a Slovenian dance?
It was a Slovenian dance at the Paddington Town Hall.
Wow.
And
not far from where we're sitting right now.
Just walking distance.
Yeah.
They were so lucky in finding each other because they had a beautiful, loving, equal relationship, even though both of them had grown up in really hard, terrible circumstances. Actually, my mum lost her mum when she was 4 years old and had like a wicked stepmother out of a fairy tale that used to throw her down the stairs into the cellar and all, horrible stuff.
So you had that modelled for you, that equal...
Absolutely.
Positive, healthy relationship of marriage.
In some ways it was traditional. My dad went out to work. He worked 6 days a week. My mum looked after us at home. But they made every important decision together. They trusted each other completely. There was no inequality in the decision making, or, my father would bring home his pay packet every week and he'd take out petrol money and he'd hand the rest over to my mum, and it was her job to look
CEO
after
of
the
household.
finances.
Yeah.
My father was such a gentle man, like a gentleman, a gentle man, and my mum such a strong woman, and I'm really lucky I've found another generation of that.
On your first date with your husband,
Yeah.
he told you he'd been to jail.
Yeah.
It's not something you'd put in a Tinder bio.
Good intro, yeah.
At what part of the date do you sort of slip that into the conversation, and do you remember how you felt at the time?
It was several hours into the date and I think I was already in love with him by the time he told me. It was absolutely first date stuff. We'd been out to dinner. We'd been out to people our age would remember Dean's in Kellett Street, Dean's
much.
Veranda.
Dean's
Veranda. The first place that had sticky date
pudding.
cake. Yes.
Yep, sticky date
and
cake
it was
is
like
so
the
true.
size of your head.
It was.
Yep. So we'd been there for dessert, and afterwards he was saying, there's really something I need to tell you. He was still on parole, actually. He still had to check in with his parole officer. I think maybe it was once a month. He was a heroin addict from about the age of 15 or 16, and he and his then girlfriend got busted as part of an importation. He was selling heroin to support his habit, like a lot of people did. And I'm sorry, I'm not minimising it in any way. That sounds, when I say a lot of people, I mean a lot of heroin addicts end up selling heroin to other heroin addicts to support their habit. And he got busted and he went to jail. And it was probably the thing that saved his life. He got clean before he went into jail, actually. He went to a Salvation Army rehab, two different ones, and went into jail and managed to keep going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings in jail, to the people who kept turning up to those jails, once a week to talk to. It was just him that would go to the meeting. Wow. It probably saved his life.
He came out, he was paroled after 3 years. He tried to get a job in politics, but because of his criminal record, he couldn't pass the security clearance. He ended up getting a job in the education department and rose.
No, it was actually, he couldn't get a job. He applied for a job with a federal minister. He got the job and then he was vetoed at the next stage. But he then got a job with the state treasurer, Michael Egan. So he got a job in politics, not in federal politics, but state politics. And he was with Michael for 15 years, first as his media advisor and then as his chief of staff. And he went from that sort of political job into a departmental job. He worked in a range of different departments. And pretty much, I know what you're going to say, pretty much every time he took on a job as a department head, there'd be a front page saying, shock horror, ex-junkie leads department. And
funnily enough, you tell the story better than I do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it kept coming up again and again, and I imagine then you became a member of parliament, then it would come up again.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask you about, obviously you and he made your peace with that, but when it kept coming up after your children were born, and you've had all three of your children after you were elected to parliament, how did you deal with that?
I thought that would be really hard. Actually, kids are amazing with this sort of stuff. I thought it would be hard to explain to the kids that their father had been in jail, because everything kids know about jail is that bad people go there.
Yeah.
And that wasn't their experience of their father. He's a beautiful father. He's a gentle, loving, responsible, capable, competent parent.
So how do you break that news
when you know
in
it's
the car? Good tactic.
In the car.
Best venue for all hard conversations, because they don't have to look at you and they can't escape.
So true.
How old were they at the time?
Oh, look, because it's come up a few different times at different ages.
3 times with different kids.
Yeah, I've had to do it with different kids at different times. Well, no, because the older kids tell the younger kids. What you find is
outsourcing.
Yeah, it's outsourcing. And my older children are, pretty direct communicators. They keep telling my youngest that he was an accident, which I spend a lot of time saying, no, I was 40 and desperate to have a third child.
We have that same conversation.
Yeah. Well, my middle one says he was the only one that was planned.
That's what my middle one says too, which is actually not untrue.
Yes. Anyway, no comment.
Comment.
Yeah, in the car. In the car is the best place for these conversations. And like all conversations that you think are going to be difficult with your kids, I find that once you start, they're surprisingly easy. And honestly, I think it has been so good for my kids. They're not judgmental. They understand that people's lives go off the rails. We're in William Street now. We lived in Woolloomooloo for a long time, just really around the corner from here, and there's a lot of street-based drug use and street-based homelessness, rough sleeping, and so they're pretty familiar with people experiencing hardship and mental illness and straight out of jail and all of the terrible hurdles that some people sadly face in life. And knowing that their father had that rough period, I think, is a real reminder to them not to judge, not to make assumptions about people.
I know what you mean about sometimes when you gear up to tell your child something that you're like, okay, if I get this wrong, they're going to end up in therapy forever and it's really important. And then you just sort of tell them. And I read an interview and you were asked about this and you said, I got to the end and I said, do you have any questions? And they went, no. It's like they're so incurious about the lives of their parents. It's like, if it doesn't impact on them today.
Yeah, but that's what they know about you. They know their father as a absolutely solid, reliable, loving force in their life. So it's kind of interesting. They're actually more interested in his punk face than anything else. They love the old photos of him dressed as a punk with a mohawk. Yeah. That's kind of much more interesting. And what music were we listening to at that age? They're pretty into that.
It's coming back in again.
Yes.
Our daggy jeans and our daggy music is all coming back in.
Well, my daughter was very cross at me for throwing out all my 80s stuff. It's like, actually, no, you're not, Anna.
I was trying to explain to my daughter who Courtney Love and Kurt Cobain were. I want to ask you about your relationship and then the kids. You've got 2 high-profile jobs, high-demanding jobs in the family. I know that there's some school of thought that we shouldn't ask women how they do it because we wouldn't ask men that. Or I disagree. I ask men that all the time. Yeah. And I think we've got a generation of women who are looking to go, well, how do you do that? If I did want to go into politics, do I have to choose? Because the other women who are at a senior level, whether it's Bronwyn Bishop, Julie Bishop, all the bishops, Julia Gillard, Michaelia Cash, they don't have children. So,
or their children are growing up.
Angela Bishop's got not Angela Bishop, Bronwyn Bishop's children are grown up to become Angela Bishop. In fact, how have you done it? What are the practicalities of your life? Because you must have had to make decisions and set things up.
I think just leap in is the advice. I really think if you try and calculate how you'll cope, it can be overwhelming. And all 3 of ours were born after I was elected, and if I had had any idea how hard parenting was, I think it would have been a bit daunting.
Well, you kept having them, so you must have managed because you went back for 2 more.
Yes, that's right. It's just like everyone else. You just muddle through, right? Yeah. You leap in and then you just muddle through. And I think when school-age girls ask me this, I say choose carefully, choose your partner carefully, because that makes all the difference. So
how do you and Michael juggle it between you?
Well, when I'm at home, we try and go for a walk every morning, and during that walk is the time when we catch up on, how the kids are going, what we need to plan for the week. I think if you're leaving things until you're stressed and something's imminent, that's when the fight starts. So we try and talk about things when there's a bit of a lead time. Do you want to do this? How are we going to manage that?
I like that you also go for a walk, because one of the hardest things as a parent, as your kids get old enough to understand, is getting either interrupted or overheard by your kids all the time. Yeah. So the idea of going for a walk is actually genius. Okay, I'll take that on board.
Or take the dog for a walk. So you get a dog walk,
get some steps,
coffee, and exercise, and a nice chat. Yeah. Yes, excellent. And this is a very difficult thing to advise people to do. If you can afford it, pay for things like cleaning and so on. If you can afford it. I'm not being insensitive to the fact that lots of people can't, but I tried to do everything until my daughter was born and actually quite a way into her life. I'd be working all week and then I'd be cleaning the bathroom on a Saturday and trying to play with her and feel like a good mother and also clean the bathroom and also prepare for the next week of work. And if you can lighten your load in any way domestically, I think it makes sense to do it. Big caveat, I get it, that not everyone can.
Is it crazy during an election time?
Yeah, it's mad. It's always mad. The travel, the time away from home, that all of that is hard, and you have to be super organised. And people say, you know, what are your hobbies? I don't have hobbies. I actually,
a hobby?
I actually work and I look after my family,
Yeah.
and exercise, I suppose, is really the only hobby
What
I
exercise
have.
do you do?
Well, we go for a walk most days. Probably do gym, like strength training, whatever, a couple of times a week, maybe a HIIT class. I love bushwalking. We try and have active family holidays. A bit of exercise as often as possible just
Good
helps
for the
me.
endorphins too.
Yeah, and also I think good example for your kids.
Yeah.
So no point trying to raise healthy kids if you refuse to put a little bit of time aside. Well, I don't mean that to sound judgy either.
I think it's about putting your own oxygen
Yeah.
mask on first, in a way, isn't it? I mean, I'm a better mother after I've exercised.
Yeah, that's
I'm a better
really
better
it's
human.
a really good way of putting it. And my daughter, for example, loves coming to the gym with Michael and I. We've done boxing training as a family. The kids like that.
They'd love punching mum and dad. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, they really like that bit of it.
Election night, the last election night we had, it was not the result that most people expected. It's not the result that the media predicted. You were, forgive me because politics seems like all this seems like a long time ago, but you were deputy opposition leader. So you would have been deputy PM.
Yeah.
And yet after Labor lost the election, you chose not to put your hand up to be leader of the opposition. Why not?
It just wasn't the right time. For 6 years as deputy leader, I was deputy leader the whole time that Bill was the leader, and I had been pretty much on the road 6 or 7 days a week. That started when Louis was 3. He was 9. And I thought, wow, I know what it's like to be deputy leader. I know what being opposition leader's like. It's even more time away from home. I couldn't muster the enthusiasm to leave them even more than I had been leaving them. And the thing that really sort of tipped me over the edge into saying, no, not right now, was on the Monday morning after the election, Louis came into our bedroom at 5 a.m. and was surprised to find me still at home. So he climbed into bed and had a cuddle and was surprised to find me at home at 5 a.m. on a Monday morning. I just thought, wow, what a life for a child to always be missing his mummy. And this is a really hard thing because I don't want to discourage women from thinking that you can combine work and work in politics and family life. You absolutely can. I've been doing it for a couple of decades. You absolutely can do it. And
your kids are great.
Well, I like to think so. Both Michael and I have at different times said, now's not the time to step up. And for example, when I was pregnant with Louis, that would have been the natural time for me to go from the junior ministry into the cabinet. And I just said to Julia at the time, I really actually don't think I can be in Canberra every Monday night when Parliament's not sitting with 2 minutes after I've had my third caesarean at the age of 40. It's a bit, but then not that long after I did go into the cabinet. It's not about saying, no, I can't do this. Sometimes this isn't exactly the right time for me or my family. If someone had told me I couldn't do it, I would have been really shitty. But
and it's also
when
like
it's
you don't
your
have
own
to just
decision,
choose once. At that time, at a particular time, it can be the right time to lean into work. At another time, it's the right time to lean into family. And you can change. As it does change, as your children get older, as your career path changes, it's not like, I always say this to women and young women, you don't just choose once.
It's
You don't just
so
choose,
true.
is it work or family? I have to choose once. You choose all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you've got a partner who really shares this responsibility with you, then he or she is often making those choices as well.
Exactly. Will you be Prime Minister one day?
Well, I'm hoping that Anthony Albanese will be our next Prime Minister whenever that election is. So that's what I'm working for at the moment.
What's the difference between being in opposition and being in government?
Being in opposition sucks and being in government is fantastic.
But what's the real difference? Yeah, right. So part of, because a lot of people, when you said, I'm not going to run for opposition leader, they're like, well, but didn't her family, why was that not a concern when she was going to be Deputy Prime Minister?
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that it's not the same, it's not comparable, those two states.
No, and I actually understand why people would ask that question. It's fair enough to ask. In government, every single day you're making a difference to people's lives. And of course you have that opportunity in opposition, but it's not on the same scale. It really is. As a member of parliament, in your constituency, you are helping people with the problem that they have with the tax office or Centrelink or the Department of Veterans Affairs. You're helping people all the time. It's incredibly rewarding work. When you're in government, you get to fix the health system, make a real difference on climate change. You get to do big,
You get to make shit happen.
world-changing, once-in-a-lifetime things. I still now sometimes, if I'm in a new city or even around Sydney, I'd drive past something and go, oh, that's that new homeless facility we built in 2008 or 2009, or these things make a lasting difference in our nation. And being the opposition leader is it's a privilege. Don't get me wrong, it is a fantastic thing to lead the Labor Party. I don't for a minute say it's not. But at that time,
it wasn't the right decision for you.
No.
Well, whether you are in government or in opposition, you are an extraordinary role model for women. You are a champion for women. And however people choose to vote, just knowing that you're there makes Canberra feel like a better place from those of us not there.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you.
Something I forgot to mention is that Tanya is actually the Shadow Minister for Women. That was an emotional interview for both of us. I'm sure you could hear it in Tanya's voice. It's echoed in the voices of so many women that I've been speaking to over the last few weeks, both those in the public eye and those just regular women who've had a lot of distress and trauma dredged up by what's currently going on. I really liked the way, though, that she said the fact that all this is happening, we've got to see that as part of the positive change and not to be complacent and say that we haven't got a lot further to go and that it is not good enough the way things are. But we were talking afterwards and she made the point that if we don't acknowledge how far we've come, it's easy to get really despondent and really despairing. So I think that balance of recognising that progress is being made while also confirming and, understanding that we've got a long way to go. If you enjoyed listening to this interview, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And you can find more episodes of No Filter on Spotify. This episode was produced by Mel Zauer. The executive producer of No Filter is Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you on the Mamamia app, which you can download from any app store.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.